black pill,
pill.
a white pill. There may be other pills, but and the way to think how this might be relevant and maybe useful to some is that
I don't know if there's a rainbow pill, but go ahead. All
could
right,
be. Yeah, that was last week. That was last week.
That's right.
If you know that scene in The Matrix
Yes.
where Bob Hope is. I mean, that's
No.
not,
That's
not
not
Oh,
even
well, that
close.
didn't happen. Okay. Nobody remembers who Bob Hope is. Do they
I'm the
remember?
only one in the room, and
remember.
probably listening ever to this. But
Okay.
go ahead.
So there's this idea that in the film, I think it's Neo is the good guy, right?
Right.
So
I think
he's
that's the
being
name.
confronted by Orpheus, right? It's Orpheus?
Yes.
Orpheus. And he asks him, he says, look, now that you know things, you can take the blue pill and you can go back to sleep and this never happened. If you take the red pill, you're going to wake up and you're suddenly going to see how things really are. And you have two choices.
Yes.
So he chooses the red pill and he wakes up and then boom, he sees how things are. Well, a few years back, my son would say longer than a few years back, there was this notion of being red-pilled and how you could get woke. And that both the left and the right used this as sort of a way to talk about things, that to be red-pilled is to suddenly be aware of things. It was often talked in the alt-right community and even in some of the incel community about how you suddenly see how things really are, and different forms of woke. On the left, it could mean something different as well. But again, it's just this state of wokeness.
Yes, waking up to new understanding, new vision of what's really going on behind the scenes, in other words.
Well, there's a wonderful scene in the Zizek film. I think it's in The Pervert's Guide to Ideology, but it may be in The Pervert's Guide to Film, where he replays that scene, and where he's in Neo's place, and he says, I want a third pill. I don't want either one of these.
Okay.
And
my sons always wanted the third choice. When I'd read in the parenting book to give them either you want to do this or you want to do that, and they always
that's why he's eating pork skins. It's really, he should have from another whatever you did back then.
There's a lot of things undoable that happened.
That's
back
right.
then,
So
but,
now
we'll see what happens.
He has a diet of pork skin. If he came up with a pork skin diet, I don't know how that would work.
It's somewhere in this keto diet, but don't ask me, and I'm not interested.
Keto.
Thank you.
Keto. Yes. But so that there are well, Zizek's point is that there is a way in which we may think that we've been woke, but that's actually an even greater trap. That to think that you suddenly see things clearly may be to be even further embedded and further trapped in things. So a wonderful example that he uses is that in California, they banned straws, and now lots of people are buying metal straws they take with them. They go to restaurants.
Right. Okay. That makes
And so
sense.
this could be an example of being red-pilled. For instance, suddenly you realize the straws, and the reason why they banned the straws is because I think the straws were affecting Liza Minnelli somehow. I don't know.
Well, no. What I was thinking was there's so much plastic that suddenly in the ocean we have this nation of.
There's a lot of plastic
floating
in
there.
Liza Minnelli.
Absolutely. I'm trying to move through that, but I didn't get very far. Go ahead.
Is she still alive?
Yes.
Okay, Kate. Okay. It's the plastic. So it lasts forever. But too much plastic, it's like killing turtles and stuff, right?
So they went to paper in California and made it a law and moved on. Yeah,
okay. There's nothing wrong with limiting plastic use, carbon footprint. But the problem, potentially, that is, as opposed to dealing with the root of the problem, of thinking about, wait a minute, what is, why do I live in a world where things are going into the ocean? What are the broader things going on here? You simply affect a small local change that may have no big consequence whatsoever. Right. Another example that Zizek gives is if you go to Starbucks and you buy a Frappuccino or a Crappuccino, whatever you buy there, and every time you buy one, you give $1 goes to support a third world country, family out of poverty. Okay. And Zizek, so again, nothing wrong with helping, but why would you question? There's a bigger question. Why do we live in a world where there's enough of everything, but there are people starving? So The question would be, you are lulled into thinking you're making a change or a difference, but you're actually just staying asleep enough in the matrix to perpetuate the very thing that has caused all these inequalities.
Okay.
And so
Right.
there is a third pill, or maybe you decide to stay in the matrix and you attempt to be able to understand it from within, maybe even undermine it in a way, or maybe you channel it or direct it in a way that may create larger change. And so that's the old idea behind, and that was the potential third pill for Zizek. But
Okay.
there's this notion of the black pill. This is the notion that you wake up and that everything is crap, and it's a form of nihilism. It's
Okay.
the idea that when you really see how things are, you say, there's a philosopher, what's his name? I'll think of his name, but
Okay.
he was partly inspiration for the TV series True Detective, the first season.
Okay.
If you ever saw that.
Yeah.
But
please
he is
show.
he's an antinatalist, and an antinatalist is someone who doesn't believe that human beings should reproduce. We should just die out. And he has a nihilist philosophy in which he sort of sees the human race as like a bacteria. We've infected the planet, and at some
Right.
point it'll develop the right sort of antibodies and we'll all be gone.
Mm-hmm.
And so that is sort of a form of the black pill, sort of like you see things and boom, everything is horrible, and so you have the potential to succumb to nihilism.
Right. Got it.
There's also a white pill, and the white pill would be the ability to, that would be religion, or in fact some evangelical folks call it the white pill, that you suddenly see that wait a minute, there's God, and there is redemption, or there is something better outside of all this and whatnot. And the point of bringing up any of those sorts of pills is that each of them represent a way of being able to dance and deal with reality.
Right.
And all of them may have a shortcoming, or they offer some sort of solution. And they have a parallel, I think, in some of the things you and I have been talking about here in terms of how do people engage with themselves and the world in such a way that, I don't want to use the word happy, because that's a pill in of itself. As an aside, there's a famous philosopher, Alain Badiou, and he calls it the happiness industrial complex.
Oh, okay.
And that part of what drives, if there were a happiness pill, for instance, it comes in the form of, Zizek talks about this too, of Western Buddhism, that we all need to start buying meditation apps and
Right.
doing yoga, don't do yoga.
Don't do it.
But
No, I got you. No.
there's a couple of jokes in there. I'm not going to go there.
I know.
But
It's good that you can hit on it and then go back to the topic.
That's because I woke up at 4 this morning. I'm tired. That's the only reason. But
yes.
So the idea that where was that with this thing? Oh, it was the yoga or and all this sort of stuff and meditation, and all those are a form of either the black or the blue or the red pill. They could be the blue pill because they allow you to become better consumers, better cogs in the machine of capitalism, without ever really questioning things. Like, for instance, again, why do we need to meditate more? The things that you feel, the fact that you can't sleep, or the fact that you have you are always anxious, maybe something you need to know as opposed to being numbed from. And the goal would be, how do we engage with ourselves? That would be a wonderful example of that there is an engagement with your own suffering in such a way that may inform you maybe how to change your life, may be able to inform you on how to be able to make the lives of others better. But none of those are the sort of pills that offer a fix that either give you numb you into sleeping or give you a false sense of being awake. And so how does all that sound?
Well, it's really interesting because the whole idea of being woke and becoming, I don't know if we've defined that very well. I mean, it's being woke to my ideas and you going along with my ideas versus being woke to the general consensus. So some groups will consider you woke and others may not at the same time. So I'm just curious about how we defined being aware. But it's awareness. It's more than what we're aware of now. It's an additional awareness or larger awareness.
Well,
how's that sound?
Yeah, I dig that. Even the term woke is already, in a way, carries with it a certain ideology, a certain politics, and a certain texture that allows you to be maybe closer to something important, but it also may blind you to some things, because if they were to offer a critique even of the notion of being woke, does that mean you're always awake? That you never have to worry about going to sleep again? That means that now you have a hold of a certain truth, and does that mean now that if you're not careful, if you have a hammer, everything is a nail?
Right.
There's a potential trap in there too.
Absolutely. The idea that you've got the best idea, or your idea is the way it is for others, and it may not be that way. In fact, it may be, maybe you woke and it's a nightmare. Or,
well, it's interesting because
or really not realistic. Maybe not.
Well, and Bion talks about this. I talk about that guy sometimes, but also Zizek mentions this in the book that I'm reading right now, and the idea that we don't wake up from a nightmare or a dream because as a way to escape the unpleasant thoughts of the dream. We wake up so we can go to sleep from the truths that the dream are trying to tell us.
Wow.
And so waking up is actually a form of avoiding something, a suffering inherent. Zizek would say a hard kernel that you can't do something with. And that sort of puts that on its head. So even the idea of being woke... It
may, as you mentioned, happiness. It may not make you happy to be woke. As a matter of fact, it may bring more anxiety into your life that you have to have that sleep you're talking about.
Well, it's a wonderful example, and they often talk about the historical texture and the context of all the things that we do, and we often have this view. That there was a thing called the Dark Ages, and people ran around that they were dumb, or they thought the Earth was flat, all this sort of stuff, and then we look back, but you and I are both here in the South, and we look back and say there was a time when we had slavery, but we've passed that. We're now, and so this notion of progress, that we've moved, that there is a place in the past that we can point to as a marker of how much we've grown and how better we are. Folks like Zizek would like to turn that on the head, because depending on how you look at it, there are actually more slaves in the world now than there ever were before. And that to prop up the first world, we have to crush so much of the third. That even as we speak, there are children being worked to death for the elements that go into our phones, or all of these things, the diamonds that we wear, and that for us to be in this place of comfort, to prop up our luck requires that there is an ocean of suffering, and that we are floating on that ocean, and to wake to that would be too much. To think, and I'm, as you know, I may have mentioned this, but I'm a vegetarian.
Yes.
I mentioned that before.
Yes.
And I remember the when I suddenly decided to become a vegetarian, I was at this club in Fort Lauderdale, and PETA, not the bread, but the organization,
right?
They had these things going on. They had these videos, and so you had to walk through a gauntlet of these mass farming videos, and all these sorts of things, and you'd walk through it, you're like, holy cow. And then when I got in, I was like, I can't unsee that. And so that can be a form of being awake. If it becomes an ideological trap, and maybe a tad fascistic, if it becomes the one thing that you devote yourself to, and you say to yourself, if we all became vegetarians, the world would be perfect, right? Right.
So yeah, somebody could have that idea.
And and there are so many different flavors of that from elements of Catholicism to elements of ecological awareness, feminism, all these things. If you're not careful, whatever truth they have and whatever importance they have, they can become a unitary a single thing, and as opposed to being able to move and make changes in the world, you're often sort of trapped by them. They offer
Right.
you an answer to the conflict that ails you, but it keeps you from being able to move outside of that. You're trapped by it. And that's always a problem, I think.
It seems to be that we're just swapping ideologies in some way. I mean, we thought we believed it. Now we have something more as we're woke, and but it partitions us off into groups or even an individual, but certainly into a group. And then there's always the opposing group. So you never quite finish this job of being woke, it seems like.
It's interesting because, again, well, Zizek's sort of a Marxist, and one of the things that a Marxist critique of diversity is that the more we begin to identify with certain tribal groups, the less likely we are to unify in a way that may generate global change. A Marxist equation is that it's class conflict,
Right.
and that the workers are being crushed by the owners of capital, and so if we fix that, it'd fix everything. But there is this critique that if we stay divided. And this is Zizek, not me, but he talks about how, like, whenever we recognize the suffering of a subset of our population, and I think the most recent would be the transgendered individuals, that we run the risk of not allowing the truth they bring to the table to arrive. Instead, what we do is we find a way to sell them jeans and tennis shoes and make all sort. They become just another tribal contingent that we can sell goods to, and the goal is that they become a market share instead of a force for change. So.
No, and it seems like it's economics, but also the politics of things at the time when you're using the market, the Marxist reference that it is. Sort of that entire nation was dealing with that, and based on that philosophy or that ideology that had both politics and economics and people's well-being and the differences in class.
I got a lot of class. You've hung on me, right? You'd realize I got class.
Man, do you have class?
I got class.
I said that
Actually, in
now
about
on
an hour, I
camera.
got class. No, hey, it's funny because we also, you and I would talk once, about there's this guy Jordan Peterson. You're
Yeah.
a big fan. You got
Yeah.
a tattoo.
Yeah.
And, I'm not going to tell you where. I'm not going to tell anybody where it is, but he can make it dance.
Okay.
And but you got.
Yes, we have
you
talked
like,
Jordan
Jordan
Peterson.
Peterson.
Yes.
And he represents sort of a response to this in a way. If Zizek's response comes from the left, Peterson's comes from the right, and his idea seems to be that there is and it's at the most conservative thought is the idea that there are some core beliefs, some things that are inherent to Western civilization or civilization in general, and those need to be held on to firmly, and they are often we run the risk of losing them. So for Peterson, it's individuality. It's personal responsibility.
Yep.
And so, as opposed, he would espouse that as the thing that we need and the thing that is missing, and that the further we move away from those sorts of things, from central myths, Christianity and things like that, they all anchor us and tether us, and that he's very skeptical of any notion of progress,
Right.
because he often his criticism with Marx, he had a debate with Zizek. It wasn't really much of a debate, really. I guess it was a debate, but he kept his thought was that the folks who dare to create change in the way Marx was advocating don't really know what they're thinking. They run the risk of losing something central and important, and then something bad is going to happen. So, Peterson's battle cry is clean your room. You know?
Right. Yeah, he wrote the 12-step of that. I'm sorry, blocking on the title right now, but it's one of his latest books. So the notion is personal responsibility.
Yeah.
Really,
I'm not very good at that.
I was going to say not
really my
that, but
forte.
what I was going to
Not my
say was
forte.
that it's a nice idea to take that personal responsibility and clean up your own room, clean up your own house, make sure your thoughts and your progression, as opposed to progressives in larger sense, but the
But
individual
here's a
progression.
progressive critique of that, though. While you're busy cleaning up your room, you're not noticing all the mess around you. So you literally have taken the potential for the movement of the species, of the potential for things to move forward, and now you're simply focusing on your dirty socks. So
Right.
it could be a form of the blue pill. It could be a way of forget about the possibility of changing things. Forget about the possibility of growing the world in some ways. Just go home and clean your room.
Right.
And so revolution becomes either delayed, minimized, or it's done away with. And
So
but I guess
that-
your room be clean.
Yeah, and not the group think that we were talking about. Okay, so the idea of the black pill bring us.
That's
what?
that's nihilism. Yeah.
So when you say, but isn't that the personal responsibility? I mean, the nihilism is, if I understand it right, that you
a lot
your
of-
enjoyments of your own personal life and so forth, and you don't see a way of going forward.
Well,
You need
nihilism-
to enjoy this now.
I think that is a form of nihilism. I think in its broadest perspective, it is a sense of the futility of everything and the pointlessness of everything, and that hedonism is a form of could be considered a form of nihilism.
Right.
Right. It's like suddenly you just join Motley Crue. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
It's like
Yes, so I understand it. So, so many pills to choose from at this
lots of
point in
chills.
time.
Yeah,
So
and I know
where does a person go with this?
Well,
these choices?
here's
here?
what I think that could be useful in thinking about this is that in each of these ways of thinking about the world, they're all a good start. I don't think any of the pills necessarily is bad, be it white, black, red, or blue. The blue one might be somewhat problematic because it simply asks you to be able to go back to sleep. But maybe there's nothing. But there may be a benefit in that. I think the thing to ask is, they're beginnings and not the end. I think I've talked about this before. If somebody comes in for therapy and they sit down on the couch and they say, "I want to commit suicide. I want to die," that's a good place to start. It'd be a lousy place to stay for too long and a lousy place to get stuck. But that's an okay start. That is where you were at. And to meet someone in that place is the beginning of being able to move, to do something with it. Each of those pills, I think, offer the possibility. If with the red pill, if you are suddenly awake to something that you weren't before, how do you move forward with that? How do you dance with it? How do you make it a truth that can be both particular and universal in its application? That
And
may not be-
especially if it contradicts something you've believed in before,
Right.
as a result of it.
you grow. Think of, in my lifetime, I have watched with women's rights, feminism. There is suddenly new ideas entered the world, and there were those who may be extreme on either side. I think it's Andrea Dworkin who said all heterosexual sex is rape because women can't possibly consent because you're under inequality. And as an extreme statement,
Right.
but it functions in a way like a bit of poetry or metaphor. It certainly could wake you up, but then what do you do with it?
Right.
Where do you move with it? And I think that is the thing that each of these pills asks. Not that one is better than the other. To suddenly, for instance, with Nietzsche, nihilism is a step toward being able to create your own life. You saw something similar with the existentialists and whatnot, that there's something about the realization of futility or absurdity that could plunge you in despair, or it could mean you can do things that you couldn't do before.
Yeah, that certainly makes sense to me. And just a while back we talked about the euthymic window. This
My favorite band.
Yeah, I got it. And on this continuum of really, because the extremes are not healthy, somewhere in the middle, and finding yourself available to the moment and really engaged in the process.
And if you think about that notion of the euthymic window, it's more probable that at each developmental phase and as we grow, the window has to grow with us. We have to be able to accept more or less based on where we're at. And that requires some flexibility. That requires our ability to be disturbed and suffer enough to do something with it. So we, again, that Guy Bion, I talk about him all the time. The idea that we have to grow a mind. I think I've used this example in the past and here that, before I didn't have a child until I was 40. And at the birth of my son, just as I was in the process of fathering a son, my son was sonning a father. I had to grow and he had to grow, and I had to grow both. I've never had a 12-year-old boy as a son, and he's never had me as a dad, and so it is a two-way street. There's something about the needing to be opened. It isn't that my son maybe and I woke each other and continue to woke each other, but we do generate moments in that euthymic window where we feel wonderful things, but we also feel not so wonderful things. And each of those, it requires us to be something more than we were the year prior. If that makes any sense.
No, it absolutely makes sense. And these sort of developmental things are going on at the same time, and then you have to relate. You have to build a relationship between the two of you in that case. And it's not always the easy thing to do. Sort of the acceptance of the other father-son issue.
And that's where that notion of like there are forms of emotional fascism. There are familial totalitarian states in which the growth of the other is too much. It is when my son's interest and his development does not coincide with the image I have of what I want him to be, I'm suddenly confronted with a tension. There is a minimal, at least, sometimes maximal amount of suffering in that moment. And what do I do with it?
Right.
Do I, beat him until he puts the football helmet on, or do I?
No.
Well,
that's not one.
It's a lot of work.
That's
Just
not
saying,
one.
it's not a lot. Or do I say, okay, there's something about who he is and how he is ising himself, how in his going on being he may be forcing me to go on being in some ways that I haven't had to do before. He pushes and pulls me out of my comfort into someplace new, just as I do that by my presence to him. And we do that dance together, dancing forward towards something that neither of us can completely name, though there is some sort of cultural mandate on where we're headed. At some point he leaves the house and I no longer have to pay for things.
Having adult sons, let me just break that myth right there. He will continue.
At some point he's going to start making me money, right? At some point I'll get some of this back. They'll be like,
Dad, can you loan me? Is not a real statement, by the way. Can you loan
me
money?
Interest.
No, there's no interest. There's no principal either. So
yeah, well, I never had those. I don't have principles.
Well. Nice. All right. So I'm glad you got that comment in. All right. So what do we do? I mean, let's say if someone is woke, one of these ideologies, taking one of these pills and sort of seeing something in a different way, in a new way that maybe challenges them and their thoughts, or maybe not. It's just a bit of enlightenment. not everybody took the pill. Not everybody's going to have that same reaction. There's always going to be this tension you mentioned, the push and pull between people who agree and don't agree and have different versions of what it should be like. That seems to be an eternal struggle in some ways for us.
Well, and this is a component in we mentioned the Zizek guy. He makes a point in saying that that conflict is inherent, even down to the level of physics. That we have this notion that there's a guy named Todd McGowan. He made a statement that the ultimate, again, this sounds political, but it has a point. The ultimate conservative notion is it is A is not B, that sort of thing. And but at the level of physics, quantum physics, this all becomes blurred. We don't have at various points, both not just as a nation or as a culture, but individually, the person who comes in and sits on the couch and says, "I want to die." The reason that's a good start is there's the possibility of them seeing in the word suicide something more than just what it is on the surface. That there is a complexity and inherent in there. It may begin that they want to die, but that it may go to a place that they want parts of themselves to die.
Right.
And it may be that they want to go that the feelings they have, they want those to go. They want the life that they find themselves trapped in dead. We begin in a place where there's an isness. It is what it is. That if we stay in there too long, it becomes like a shell. We can't grow out of. But over the course of the work that we do, it begins to mean more and more and more than what initially sounded nihilistic and destructive is ultimately liberating, because it started us on some path towards something.
No, I like the idea. There's a bit of what you were saying a moment ago about this awakening and this idea of new ideas and new ideology. But it also can become sort of self-centered in a way, maybe even narcissistic. And we've talked about that plenty of times on the show. So it's the ability to empathize and connect with other people. I think that's a basic issue that we've kind of
and think about the
gone
empathy and
with.
connecting with yourself, the empathy and to connect with ideas, to be able to there is something when you see yourself and someone as whole. That wholeness, in a way, is a metaphor for a certain level of chaos held in tension. It is that there is a complexity there. There is a muchness, not a too muchness or a too little, but it is pregnant with something. And I think in some ways that's the opposite of narcissism. The narcissist sees both themselves and the world in a way that they are trapped in, and your ability to move into something more complex and something more fluid allows you the opportunity to grow. The narcissistic position is ultimately one that is useful but simply defensive. Just like the person who comes in and says that they want to die. That's also in some ways a defensive position. It may be the best thing they can come up with in light of all the suffering they're feeling in this moment. Hence, it's a good place to start. You always have to start somewhere, and that's as good a place as any. But you have to keep moving.
Yeah, especially when you struggle so much in your personal life that you're going to a therapist and you're going to finally say what you've been thinking and feeling on the inside, and allow a person to connect with you and have a discussion about that and maybe see some options for yourself.
As long as the insurance is good.
Okay, that's true. If you're in private practice, that's
right.
right. All right. Well, people have to make a living, but I'm thinking all that's coming out wrong here on the video.
Sorry, it's not. I got to make a living. Yeah. I got to afford a boat.
A boat. Do you want to rethink that? Maybe I don't
really want a boat.
I'm
not much for. But I could put it in my pool. I guess like a dinghy.
Yes, get a small boat.
I just like saying the word dinghy because something about that just makes me kind of giggle.
Yeah, it does. Me too. So there we are. And I'm not sure why. All right. Well, All right. So final thoughts on this in terms of just this. You started out talking about the black pill. You talked about the blue and the red pill, and even the white pill.
The white pill.
Religion.
That'd be religion or some sort of faith.
But it almost seems that there could be, I don't know, an infinite number of these pills, depending on the particular ideology or awakening or enlightenment that a person may have.
Well, maybe the takeaway is this: is that regardless of the pill, all of those pills might be a good start, but if they offer the possibility of some sort of permanent change, if they offer a solution with a capital S, then to be wary of them. That they're potentially a trap, and that there is, just as another part of the reason why I used my example of my son is that it's a place in my life that I can truly feel I'm growing whether I want to or not. Mm-hmm. He's about to be a teenager. Mm-hmm. I thought the level of sarcasm was high before, but we've reached
just wait
level 5. It's 5. And I find myself
DEFCON 5.
That's right.
Yeah,
I find myself. I don't think I've had this many murderous thoughts my entire. It's like but all of that discomfort, he moves me out of that euthymic window into some place that I have the potential to be able to grow, just as I move him. In those moments of tension and the dance between us, we move. And my guess is any of these pills, if we're not careful, there's a term that, since we're hanging on Zizek, tarry with the negative. And the idea is that you have to find a way to dance with these things. It comes from the philosopher Hegel in a sort of vulgar way or a oversimplified way of looking at what Hegel called dialectics is that there's a thesis and then an antithesis, and then there is a synthesis, a combination of those two things. So somehow, if you say, I want vanilla, and then somebody says, no, I want chocolate, then you come up with Neapolitan ice cream. Is that what it is?
Yeah.
That's what it is?
Close.
Okay.
Yeah.
But that's
the third one,
Yeah, there's this really...
Yeah, the vanilla, the chocolate, and the strawberry, I think.
Is that
Neapolitan?
Okay.
Yes.
That's Neapolitan.
For the record, yes.
Okay, I don't know my ice creams. This just seems wrong.
It's wrong all the
way. You keep your chocolate, your ice cream separate. But a more truthful form of that, or a more useful form, is not just some simple synthesis, but there is movement. There is both can be maintained in some sort of dialectical tension, or in the movement from one to the other. Someone says you want vanilla, they say they want chocolate, and you suddenly discover strawberry. There is the possibility of, and there's something about that dance and that tension that is necessary. And most fascist ideologies, most attempts at a quick fix ruin the possibility, if you're not careful, of the sort of movement you need and to continually grow. That would be one of my criticisms of some of the way research on happiness has been, or even some of the positive psychology stuff. If you're not careful, it runs the risk of ironing over an inherent tension that is necessary for us to continue to move forward in the ways that we need to.
Yeah, that tension is all. Sometimes that's all we can see, all we can focus on, and it comes to this idea of knowing yourself. We talked about this in different ways, but knowing yourself and being a critical thinker. And
I'm very good at being a critical thinker.
Critical thinker. But really surveying the ideas and making some choices about things, and also being empathic and the use of empathy for others and connecting with the larger group. So, that's quite a bit of skill that a person has to have in order to make these woke moments really work and move forward. It's
a good thing that I am so skilled. It's a good thing that I am a god among men, or a salad dressing among steak sauce, or trying to work trying to work some sort of.
This has to be the wind down of the show because I'm not understanding anything at this point. I think I've missed.
I did say I got up at 4:00, and I didn't get a lot of sleep last night.
Right. Sorry to hear that.
Well, I can't tell you why.
Uh-oh.
Because the tape's rolling.
Yes,
and my
okay.
wife may hear it.
And we may. Okay.
Odds are not, because she gets enough of me and wouldn't. But actually, between you and me,
We
can I
may
talk
have
about
to
this?
censor this show somehow.
They
But
don't
go
censor-
ahead. Yeah, whatever.
Okay, here's what happened.
Nobody's listening. Go ahead.
Okay, my wife got her haircut,
Yes.
and she got it.
Hey, you there, the alien watcher. You like watching podcasts, don't you? Just like you like watching for UFOs and other unidentified flying objects. You get what I'm saying. So tune in to ColumbusPodcasting.com, where all your podcasting needs can be achieved with us. So we're supposed to be doing a podcast commercial, but my business partner is watching the podcast because he likes to keep his mind on the go all the time, even while recording. It's never a bad time to watch a podcast. It's never a bad time to create a podcast. It's never a bad time to know about podcasting. So, ColumbusPodcasting.com. All your podcasting needs can be achieved.
If you're interested in a podcast, want to be a part of a podcast, or even create your own podcast, come down to the studio on First Avenue and we'll show you how it's done. ColumbusPodcasting.com.
Doing? What's going on? Tell me about it. I like your shirt.
Yeah, I just got back from the gym, and this was so I don't smell good, and I'm you know. What's that Bob Dylan lyric? I was listening to a Bob Dylan song. He says, "My shirt's tight with sweat, but not as tight as a corner I've painted myself in."
Wow.
So that's what he said.
That's kind of deep.
It is.
That's right. He's got all the lyrics.
And then one of the lyrics, what I like, he said, "You're gonna need me, honey. You can't make love all by yourself." I thought that was,
Okay.
I thought that was a good one too.
That's pretty blunt, straight out there.
It was, yeah.
Well, it's good to see you, and I know it's been a little while, so let's figure out what's on your mind.
Post
today.
Tarantino.
Come on.
Post. That was the last thing
This
we talked
is
about.
post Tarantino. Now, I did send you some additional materials that maybe we didn't touch on some of the things.
Well,
from
I
that.
think you may want to look at those, but I actually I didn't.
Okay, but that's all right. Well, I didn't figure we were going to recap or anything, but I was thinking.
But
that
it was the
made some
Atlantic. Those
point.
guys. In fact, I wonder if I've actually seen that article. I may have because the Atlantic sends me things through the Facebooks.
Okay. Well, she's a pretty good writer. I mean, they compared her to Hitchens and some other people. I'm not sure she's at that level, but she's done some pretty good work just looking down the list of her articles. This one, I think, captured some of the psychological issues that we were starting to touch on, maybe expanded a few things.
This
So
is Tommy Lauren.
No.
That's a joke.
Oh, that's another.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. There are times when
Dana Stevens.
those references go ping,
Yeah,
over the
it's
top.
yeah.
But that's good. But maybe we'll do another recap. But I tell you what, why don't we just plan at one point to go back and look at our recent episodes and do a I wished I would have said.
Yeah, there are actually
notion
a lot of things I
on
wish
there.
I wouldn't have said.
Well,
I have
in
a
your
lot of
case-
regrets.
In your case, no, what you did say we should have taken out and edited. But just to kind of comment on what we've done so far in this. All right, so let's get to it. Well, so
Well,
what
a
is
couple
it?
of things, because this would be potpourri, because there was something you brought up, the social
man.
confirmation, and also when we leave here, I'm going to be seeing a horror film,
Yes. Okay.
and the horror film is, and so there's we could talk a bit about just the nature, the psychological utility of the horror film, because you had said your wife had said, why would you.
Why would you possibly go and watch a horror movie?
Yes.
No, but not
Yeah.
only her though, but I know members of the family out and groups.
why would you
that
possibly? Well, why do you think
we,
that is?
We
Why?
avoid horror movies at all costs.
Why is that? Why do
what
they
that is.
avoid horror movies? What do you think that is? Wimps.
I think it's something deep and psychological and scary.
Really?
And let's try to stay away. Maybe I don't know. I'm guessing at this, but the idea that we stay away from scary things. There's enough scary things in the world. Why would we intentionally?
That's right. Yeah. Why
go
intentionally?
toward that? Right.
Well, so that would then why would someone want a horror movie? Some people choose to see them, and right now the horror genre is sort of ascendant. There are, there are big name.
They are.
But why would someone want to go see a horror movie?
I'd like to turn that question back on you. Why would someone want to go see a horror movie? I mean, I'm sure you don't ask the question around here unless you already have an answer pretty close by. So
I do have,
let's go with that.
There are a couple ways to think about this because, we talked before about the, right now the cutting edge of the field is with, where it dovetails with neuroscience.
Right.
And one of the ways to think about any of the things that we do art-wise is we can see them through that lens. And there's this notion of the euthymic window. We've talked about that before.
Yes.
And that is that there is this there is a window with an upper limit and lower limit, and that we attempt to be able to maintain a homeostasis, and that we attempt to be able to remain within that window. And some people's windows are narrower and lower. So when you talk about folks who don't like horror films, the upper register of their euthymic window may be a bit lower than those who do. And so when we get on a roller coaster, for instance,
right,
we want to be at the upper level of that euthymic window. So we take that homeostasis and we tilt it in this direction. So we give ourselves a safe and calculated thrill that just verges on trauma, but it doesn't.
Right.
So it's up in that limit. Just like we
Right.
watch like some people would say, why would you want to watch Old Yeller, right?
Right.
Because, and that's the bottom end of the euthymic window. That is sadness. Like, why watch a movie where, like, everybody dies of cancer,
Right.
and then the kid, their dog gets hit by a car. What? But people
Right.
do that, right? They
Yes,
do it.
they do,
So
and
in
it's
some
really
ways,
popular.
the weeper, the romantic tragedy is the opposite end of the euthymic window, bottom end, where the horror film is on the upper. So, and thrillers do a little bit of that too, but there is something about the horror film that we generate a false threat, and we place ourselves in the midst of that for that experience. And that experience,
Right.
and another way to think about this too is there was a cat by the name of Daniel Stern. He did a lot of work with infants. He talks about vitality affects.
Okay.
And that, if you ever notice, like, if you have a baby, you ever seen one of them babies?
Yes, I
have.
couple at the house there
And-
for a number of years.
So yeah,
but
I had one of them too. It was like, oh. And at one point I was like,
scary.
yeah.
Another
Speaking
thing.
of horror film, holy
Yeah,
cats.
that's right. Our own personal horror film right there. At the house.
And I'm
That's
convinced that if anybody, when we were about to have a kid, everybody's like, "Oh, it's great, you're gonna love
Oh,
this baby
can't
thing."
wait till you have a
Nobody
kid.
tells me, and then those same people, I'm like, I haven't slept in 6 months.
Right.
I'm covered in all sorts of horrible things, and
You
you're like,
don't smell very good.
and then
either.
the same people that told me how great it was looked at me and said, "Yeah, isn't it horrible?" I'm like, "That's not what you were telling me
That's
before."
not how you told me all this wonderful stuff that was going to happen. You should do it too. No, sharing my pain is what this
What
might
were
be.
you
I don't
up
know.
to with this thing? Okay, but you have having the baby. Say somebody interact with a baby. There's a way in which to be able to interact with a baby. We do peekaboo, peekaboo. We speak in a way that we accent these vitality affects. We scare them. We do all these sorts of things. So the very development of our nervous system is based on these interactive moments in which we create attenuated near traumas. We literally generate these things.
Mm-hmm.
So you can think about it. A horror film is a little like just grown-up peekaboo.
Right.
So it's from Stern's standpoint, we seek out these experiences that give us this same sort of peekaboo. So what is a horror film? It's just a giant screen version of that sort of peekaboo.
Well, it's almost something that we do that we have some control over as
Yeah, right,
well.
and it is a controlled
So we
trauma.
don't go out of too far out there to scare ourselves and really bring about the trauma, but it's sort of regulated in some way. So I can understand it now. Well, that's helpful. But you're right. The movie, the horror genre is everywhere. There's always a horror movie on. almost always a horror movie on.
And another way to think about this from a neuroscientific perspective, there is Panksepp, I think I'm pronouncing his name right. He talks about that the brain is actually organized along, there's 7 organizing principles of the brain. So there are like 7 systems. And one of those, I think there's procreation, there's aggression, there's seeking, there's attachment, there's sleepy, there's there's
I knew that was coming. All right, keep going.
There's I'll have to think about the others, but
Okay.
But
That's
one of the
all right.
ones that are important is this the seeking system. And they use the example of a dog. Like this morning, my wife and I got up and we walked the dog.
Okay.
And apparently you're supposed to use a leash, and if it bites somebody, you're supposed to have you have legal recourse. I didn't know that. I just ran.
Okay.
But,
Okay.
So we walked the dog. Dogs are a wonderful example of the seeking system. Just wagging tails,
Right,
smelling
right,
stuff.
right.
Ate a diaper. Somebody threw a diaper out. The dog ate it. I don't know. These things
Yes,
happen.
I think I get the point.
But the dog
yes.
does the seeking thing.
It did not eat a diaper, but go ahead. All right.
He did smell a diaper. My wife got
Okay,
upset.
all right, there we
But it was a really big baby's diaper. Like, I'm thinking that baby had to at least be 200 pounds. So I'm not really sure what was going on there. And there was a pacifier the size of like
a giant pacifier,
Yeah, it
like
was
an adult pacifier.
Yeah, I'm like,
Is that where we're going?
what was that? What was that
Okay.
about? But
I'm definitely not ready, but I'd like to get to the end of this example at some point. Yeah.
Dog seeking. And we have the same thing. And so part of it is that, that we often have to seek out, like, boredom is something we all have to find a way to escape. We have to create a life in which there are not just bright and shiny things, but there are things that are loud. There are things that move quickly, and the art serves that purpose too. And you can think of a horror film. It's got some bright and shiny, but it's also got some booms and some things that move quickly, and so that
alarms us just enough,
But
not
see,
full scale.
in these moments, all that sounds cool, but I think we should also go down the rabbit hole of Melanie Klein.
Okay, you're going to talk object relations.
Object
with us now,
relations,
right
and
now.
Melanie
Okay,
Klein.
get ready for that.
So this is one of the things that's about Melanie. And Melanie Klein, if you go back and read some Melanie Klein, some of that stuff is just really way out there, like that. But one of the things she brings up is the first art object is Mom.
Okay.
And Mom is both the first Old Yeller, the first romantic comedy, but also the first horror movie we see.
Okay.
And so incorporated in
All right,
that is the notion that, and Klein talks about how there are things inside Mom that we'd like to have. We don't know what they are. There are ways in which she comes and goes. There is a capricious element to her connection to us. Her interests move elsewhere. And so there are feelings of shame and anger and degradation. And there's this cat by the name of Julia Kristeva, who sort of takes from she takes from Melanie Klein, and she talks about the notion of the abject. And she says that part of what Mom does for us and society in general, to define who we are, we have to not own or disown parts of ourselves. And so there are elements of us if you ever thought about the human body, it's pretty gross. There's lots of horrible, disgusting things going on at all times.
Yes.
There are.
Okay.
And we have to quickly, to define ourselves in a positive sense, we quickly label parts of ourselves that we need to disown to have. So there has to be a negative to be a positive. And so there are tremendous elements of us that are considered the abject, right? Mm-hmm. And a wonderful example of of the abject, and Zizek talks about this, is I may have mentioned before too, but think about it.
Okay.
Think about the amount of saliva you swallow every day.
Can I not think about that? Because my guess is it's a lot.
It's a lot.
It's a lot.
So if you just take a small bit of that, just a glassful, and over 5 or 10 minutes, just spit it into a cup.
Right.
And then try to swallow it.
No. No,
it's not
that
good,
would not
right?
be. But I know we're okay. Keep going though.
So,
I got the
and
idea,
even
the
the thought of that
grossness of it all.
generates nausea. So there's this in horror. There's a return of the parts we've disowned. I mean, if you think about horror movies, often have people getting cut up, gore, vomit, all the very things that
Lots of blood.
blood. I mean, even if you've ever watched Silence of the Lambs, there's a point where ejaculate gets thrown at Agent Starling. So you can't think of a single emission or a bodily emission that we don't have some sort of ambivalence or conflict with that doesn't find its way into a horror film.
Okay.
And so, according to Kristeva, we need the occasional rendezvous with disowned parts of ourselves to generate some sort of homeostasis. So it's like we watch horror films in some ways to become reacquainted, at least temporarily, with parts of ourselves that we know but we don't own. Right?
Right.
And there's a whole genre, and it's really taken off, of the body horror, where, Aliens is a wonderful example of early body horror.
Right.
I
Right.
don't know if you've seen that movie, that Alien movie.
I think
where
I
the
have.
thing
They're
goes,
bursting out of the
You know,
person,
the thing,
yes, and running across the room.
that's a
so-
wonderful example, and Kristeva even talks about that. That this is an example of the abject, something inside of us, and she draws a connection between all sorts of things, even sexuality. There's a way in which we are sexuality owns us. In teenagers, suddenly hair starts popping up everywhere. You suddenly start having all these weird urges, and all these sort of things start to happen. That's a little like the alien that popped out of that guy's chest.
Mm-hmm.
There are parts of us that just go boom, right?
Right.
And Christopher
And
talks
it's
about
lifelong too. It continues as you
Right,
get
it does.
into
Yeah.
later age. I understand.
and when you start getting older, and then the
Yes.
body horror is real, right?
Yes,
Like,
unfortunately, as we get a little older, yes,
Right,
there are a
you
lot
just,
of those
you know-
things coming back.
Yeah, you got like things start to sag,
hair starts to grow in different places.
It does. Yeah, it's
Exactly.
like you wake up and you've got like these things happen. Another film that sort of that really connects with this notion of the abject. Ever see that movie? Not the original black and white one, but the John Carpenter The Thing movie.
Yes, of course.
And remember, it's like all about bodies that turn themselves inside out. There's even a scene where they're doing the coding. What do you call it, with the defibrillator thing?
Right.
And suddenly the guy's chest, he goes into the guy's chest, and the guy's chest grows teeth, and then bites off his hands.
Yes.
Remember that scene?
Spoiler alert, I guess,
Yeah.
for
Boom.
some of
that
the,
happens.
that
And then the guy
Carpenter
stands
movie.
up and he's got blood squirting out of these stumps. Ah,
Right, right.
So in that single
Nice
moment,
special effects, but
it was.
that's
And
the
then-
only way I can get through it is consider it to not be
But
real.
see,
as
notice,
special
so
effects.
you have to generate enough distance. So you generate, you move. Your ego quickly does its thing and draws a line in the sand.
Right.
But even in the act of doing that, there's something that could be considered healthy, that you are exercising your ego and your capacity for drawing a line in the sand and generating a boundary between you and the rest of the planet. And that movie allows you a chance to do that.
Mm-hmm.
It allows you a chance to play with those sorts of moments. And embedded in both Aliens and The Thing are a relationship with our body that we're not completely conscious of.
Right, and it's operating, and then so when we watch these horror movies, that we're reaching that upper limit of the dysthymic window you're talking about, and it's okay for us because it helps us regulate the real horrors that are out there that we face at
And the
times.
more you can expand your euthymic window, if we think back to Freud, that we define mental health as the capacity to love, work, and play. Well, those who have a very narrow euthymic window, and I don't know any studies in this, but folks who are really, really, really upset by horror movies, we may find that may be a constricted euthymic window due to developmental trauma, for instance. Right? It's suddenly
It's restricted by the life experience or
Right.
the trauma that the person has already experienced early on in their
and
life.
part and one of the key elements of effective therapy in many ways is it's either in vivo or guided exposure. So what happens when someone comes into a therapy session is they slowly but surely begin to put into words the alien that's trying to pop out of their chest. And so it doesn't have to pop out of their chest. They can simply say, I some days it feels like there's something going to come out of me that I have no control over.
Right.
Boom. And that euthymic window expands. Their capacity for self-regulation, their capacity for the modulation of their inner states.
Right. Okay.
And so you can think about,
yeah, it's almost like growth in that area. The more you're exposed it's okay and you can kind of manage it and regulate it, then you can take on more of that as you need. If you don't expand that, you're going to be frightened and scared and probably have difficulties with lots of things in the world.
Yeah, in some ways, as opposed to a spectator of a horror film, you may find yourself in the middle of it, even after you leave the theater. And, there's lots of talk in this notion of locus of control.
Right.
And individuals who have externalized their locus of control, they're often in a horror movie. There are all these ways in which we are that when people enter therapy, what often happens is they begin to modulate the things they feel. They begin to experience an extended locus of control. That euthymic window broadens. These are all things that can happen that you can work towards. Right?
But yeah, and I was thinking, we mentioned the family members and somebody who would never see these horror movies. They're restricting themselves in a certain way because of that. But also, on a conscious level, it's like I don't want to be exposed to that. It's too real. In other words, they sort of label it as this movie, and I've said that to my wife on a number of occasions. These actors are getting paid a lot of money to have their hands cut off or whatever that might be.
Well, what do you think about
special
this, though?
effects, it's not real. And I'm not sure that everybody, I think people are kind of like at the surface level of thinking that it hits them in that way, even though they know
why do you think that
different.
would be then? So because, for instance, in your case, you can navigate these sort of stage traumas in a horror film by saying, well, this is good special effects. You can allow yourself a capacity to be both participant and observer in the film, and you can generate enough observer self-reflective status to be able to say, okay, right now, let me remind myself this is just, and the special effects are great. Some people can't.
Getting better.
What now?
They're getting better.
They're getting better,
I
yeah.
mean, it looks